Hi, I'm Keegan Flegner. When I was in first grade, I was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. Since that time, sports have played a huge role in changing my life. So I want to show the world how all kinds of sports can help all kinds of people with all kinds of mental and emotional challenges. Welcome to Sports on the Spectrum. My guest today is David Harris. When I was 8 years old, I played on my first baseball team in the Santa Monica, California Little League. David was my coach for the next 3 years, and he was one of my favorite coaches of all time. And on top of that, we're both die-hard Dodger fans. David coached over 20 Little League teams and spent his last 4 years as the league president. David is also an avid long-distance runner. He completed the Los Angeles Marathon in 2015 and has run several other marathons since then, so please join me in welcoming David Harris to Sports on the Spectrum.
Keegan, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Oh, it's a pleasure, man. It's a real pleasure. Now, I think it's appropriate that before I start asking some questions to you, I think it's important for the audience to understand why and how, you've had such a big influence on me. David is all very unique and just very helpful, too, with how he approached the game. He was always helpful to everybody on the team. He never left anybody out. I really appreciated that part. And also, actually, I think this is a good example that I have right here of just how important a coach he is. So one of the things that David would do after every game was he would always give out the game ball. And he would always make sure that even before he gave out this game ball, he would make sure to outline specifically why each individual player deserved it. So I have here literally, and for those of you listening, I'm sorry, but I'll try to explain this as best I can. I literally have one of the very first game balls I ever received from you, and there are a few more, but this is one of them. And on it, too, there's something else I'd like to outline, too. And that is something that David created that I think everybody should follow when playing sports in general, too. It's not just baseball. And that is the 6 rules. Now, I'd like to be the one to say it, but I know David knows this better than me. So David, could you actually tell us what the 6 rules of baseball are?
Okay, so the first rule is have fun, right?
Yes.
Because that is
Very
by
important.
far the most important thing when playing sports is you got to be having fun.
Very
So,
important. That's very important.
Rule number 2 would be safe, because you got
Absolutely.
to be safe.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're not going to be having fun, and it's really important to be safe.
Absolutely.
Third one is play hard.
Yep.
Because no matter what you do, you got to be playing hard. And I always say that everyone's got a different abilities.
Yes.
Some are going to have more skills than others, but we all have the same ability to do our very best. And so
Absolutely. I mean,
there you go.
that's how I always played. I wasn't skilled.
There you go. All right, you tell me the fourth one now.
Do you not know, or do you want me to tell it?
No, I do know, but I want to hear you
Okay.
say something.
All right. Well, I'll say it. So rule number 4 is think first. And that's very important because it's like if you don't think, it's like how are you going to know what to do? You always have to make sure you know what you're doing, because if you're not doing anything, what are you even doing? And then rule number 5 is teamwork. Now, this I think was actually my favorite one because it's so important to symbolize just how much the sport really is about. It's like you cannot do anything alone on this stage. You need to have your teammates there to help you, and work together. And I think that's very important that, it's applicable to basically any aspect in life. You always are going to need help, and you always need to work as a team. And then number 6, well, number 5 might have been my favorite, like as a mature person. Number 6 is kind of my favorite, not as an immature person, but just as a kid in general. And that's have fun. I know we said it, rule number 1, but have fun is just so important that it has to be the first rule and the last rule when playing sports. You need to have fun.
Absolutely, Keegan. And I am thrilled to hear that you've taken all those lessons into heart. Because,
Oh my, yeah.
yeah.
I never forget them. And before actually we go into the questions, I want to just add one more piece to the puzzle that I think makes David unique. And that is he always makes sure we know just how important something is. Like he will always, explain, why you should do something, why it matters, and also just like why others have done it in the past and why it's important. So like another example of something David has always done that I think is very helpful is he always used to tell us stories at the end of practices and games, to kind of both to, give us the fun aspect of the game, but also to explain to us, hey, there are certain things that these people did that did truly make an impact in the game. So, like, for example, I remember literally the very first practice I ever had with you, the story you told us about at the end of all the blood, sweat, and tears that we had to endure was the story of Kirk Gibson's game-winning Game 1 home run in the World Series of 1988.
That is a still to this day, it still brings just makes all the little hairs on the back of my neck stand on end.
Yes.
It's a great,
Yeah.
great story.
Yeah. And for those and for the audience too, um, both David and myself, we are hardcore Dodger fans too. So we always love a good Dodgers story at the same time and a good
Yeah,
Dodgers moment. Shout out to the 2020 champions, by the way.
no doubt. And if you
Oh,
think about that home run and you think about the six rules of baseball, like pretty much all six rules are encompassed in that one moment in that,
absolutely.
so Kirk Gibson, who, more than anything, that guy just loved to play baseball. So I think
Yes.
he had rule
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
down pat,
And yeah, I
having
mean, the other thing too is he liked it so much that he was even willing to endure whatever it was that had lingered him for so long. It's like, hey, I may be
Yep,
hurt, but that doesn't mean I still can't put my best foot forward. And who knows, maybe even that's enough sometimes. And
exactly.
for him, it was.
And then you look at rule three, play hard. I don't know that there's any player who's ever put on a Major League Baseball uniform who played harder than
Yeah,
Kirk Gibson.
yeah,
Every single play. It was
yeah,
just really pretty incredible.
yeah. And the other thing too is it's not just Kirk Gibson. I know a lot of players have followed that oath. In fact, I know for a fact that one of Ken Griffey Jr.'s greatest quotes ever was, talent may get you on the field, but it's the effort and hard work that will keep you there.
Exactly. And then, of course, think first, the rule think first.
Yes.
Remember Kirk Gibson when it was 3-2 and he's facing Dennis Eckersley. What does he
Right.
do? He steps out of the box
Yep.
because he starts thinking, he remembers what that scout said is a
Right.
3-2 count to left-handed hitter.
Right.
You're going to get that backdoor slider.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, he stepped in and here
Yep.
comes that backdoor slider.
Right. No,
And the
it's
rest is history.
yep, absolutely. We will surely never forget that. At least not as Dodgers fans.
Good stuff.
Oh, it's great. It is really great. But with that, I think we should actually move into the questions part. I think that's
Sure.
kind of what our audience was really here for, and I think it's important we address that. So, why don't we start a little bit with you personally, David? So,
Mhm.
how about we start at the beginning of your life? What were your very first memories of sports? And it can be anything, watching it on television, playing Little League as a kid, or what following your favorite team, any of that stuff. What do you remember most about that, and why did you like it?
So I think my earliest memory of sports was probably growing up watching Dodger games with my grandfather,
Mm,
and he and I used to sit on a couch in their apartment, and I was very fortunate. My grandparents lived pretty close to where I lived, and
definitely a
we
blessing.
used to, yeah, and we would listen to Dodger games, and just there was something about the calming voice of Vin Scully.
Oh
and
yeah.
and I would just remember sitting there lying on the couch, and my grandfather had he had this big stomach, and I used to always joke that it was like God's perfect pillow. And I would lie down on his stomach, and I would hear the rhythm of his breathing along with Vin Scully's calling a game. And every so often I could just feel my eyes getting a little bit heavier and heavier and heavier, and then I would
Mm,
fall asleep. And then I would wake up and I would look up, and my grandfather, he was sleeping too. And
mm.
but I will tell you that watching Dodger games with him, probably my earliest and fondest memories of sports. So,
Yeah.
and I've always been drawn to sports. And I don't know,
Yep.
from the time I was a little kid, it was, if there was something on TV and it was sports. I remember getting up early in the morning on Saturdays, not to watch cartoons, but because they had Canadian rules football on, which I
Mhm.
didn't quite understand, but it was on and I was going to watch it. So sports has always just really captured me.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, I think, because we all know everybody has a special thing with their grandparents. And it's great to hear that even for somebody like you still had something unique to, be with them and all. And I think that's something that's very nice to enjoy. I definitely think it's something that we can all relate to and say, either we've experienced that ourselves or we wish we could experience that ourselves. You know,
Yeah.
so
And interestingly, Keegan, it was I actually started playing baseball kind of later. I didn't play in t-ball, and my first year of playing baseball was when I was 11 years old.
oh
And so I started a little bit later than most, and I'm not really exactly sure why, because I just always really loved sports, and it just never worked out before then.
yeah,
But I just any sport I
yeah,
was willing to play.
yeah. Hey, it's never too late to start something, and look what's happened ever since.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, hey, it doesn't matter how long you've been in this. If you've been in it, that's something.
Mhm.
So that's very helpful. And I think that kind of leads into my next question a little indirectly, I guess, which is that, as you were growing up, watching these teams and all, what were some of those specifics that you looked up to, like both teams and players? And why was that?
That's a great question, Keegan. And I will tell you that the one thing that I've really always come to appreciate is really teamwork. And to me, I grew up here in Los Angeles, and basketball, UCLA basketball was a big thing for me. My parents were season ticket holders, and
Mm,
and I was fortunate enough to grow up at a time when John Wooden was still coaching.
right, right.
And boy, he just stressed the fundamentals. And watching his teams play, it was just a thing of beauty. It really was. And
Yeah,
and you can see in baseball teams too, teams that played together, they won. And you could see just the strategy of what they were doing and why they were doing it. And that always just really captured me. And I thought that the beauty that there's like, and I'm going to choose my words carefully here. So if it comes out wrong, translate this away. It doesn't sound quite as sappy as what I'm about to say.
absolutely.
But the beauty of sports is that it combines both the mental aspect and the physical aspect.
Yep,
And when those two come together,
yep,
there's just something really great about it. And
yeah,
then the other great thing um, about coaching,
hmm,
which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later, is that
right,
it provides us with the opportunity to teach life lessons that transcend the game itself. And I
yep,
think I've always been able to look at sports and see the people who were playing it the right way and the people who weren't. And I remember, even discussing with my grandfather about people who respected the game
hmm,
and people who didn't. And you could always tell the players that really respected the game, respected the history, respected their teammates, played the game the right way, ran out their ground balls, really hustled, did whatever it took to make the team better.
right,
I was always drawn to those players, and then there were other players you could see that were just in it for their own
right,
doing, and those were the ones that was you just kind of felt like they were kind of cheating the game and cheating the fans and cheating
right.
themselves.
Yeah, no. I mean, obviously, some actually were, but we don't have to get into the specifics of that. And I guess before we get into a little more uh, deeper meaning of sports or and how it connects to the spectrum aspect of what we're talking about here, I'll just fire off a quick one here. What was like your proudest or favorite moment in your own sports experience?
um, in my own sports experience, I would say my proudest moment came when I was 12 years old, and I was on playing in Little League.
Mm-hmm.
So, to give you a little bit of background, like I
Yep.
said, my 11-year-old season was my first season, and I
Right.
got drafted straight into the majors,
Right.
and I was not good.
Yep.
I was the kid who got in for 2 innings a game,
Yep.
and I didn't get a hit the entire season. And
Mm-hmm.
back then, they used to publish
Right.
everyone's batting averages right next to
Oh.
the snack stand. And I
Yep.
was always, they used to call me the triple bagel because I was 0 0 0. So I
Nice.
never got a base hit. And it was, I still had a great season, in terms of having fun.
Yep.
But boy, I made more errors, and really it was just, I was not a very good player. But
Yep.
somewhere between 11 and 12, I started getting my confidence up, and And I started just playing better. And so the first game of the season, um, the I was in center field and we were down by a run and the bases are loaded with 2 outs. And my manager came out and he did this and he pointed to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned around and I'm like, is he pointing at me? Like I couldn't believe he wanted me to come in and pitch because I'd never really pitched before. Sure,
Right.
I during practice I was pitching,
Right.
but he yells out to me. He goes, Harris, come in. And
Yep.
I'm looking, I'm like, is there another kid named Harris or something? Like, what was the deal? He
Yeah.
goes, David, get in here. So I come running in there.
Right.
So here the bases are loaded. There's 2 outs. We're down by a run. And I'm thinking, holy crud. I worked the count to a full count. I ended up striking that kid out.
There you
And
go.
I jumped off the mound like I had just won Game 7 of the World Series. And I was so happy. Ends up in the bottom of the inning, we didn't score and we ended up losing by 1. But I just remember at that moment
Right.
that I just felt like I could do it. And the fact that my coach had confidence in me to bring me in that situation, I couldn't believe it. And in fact, I remember one of my teammates said, why are you bringing him in? Because he was a teammate of mine the year before. He goes, he's horrible.
Right.
And he goes, why don't you bring me in? And my coach just looked at me and he pointed at me and he goes, because he looks like a pitcher. And I was like, wow, he had the confidence in me. And because he had that confidence in me, I went out there and I was able to strike him out and ended up pitching a lot that season and did pretty well. So
there you go.
So that to me was like a turning point where I just like all the confidence in the world that coach had in me just really turned it around.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like it doesn't take much for somebody to get the necessary confidence and be able to suddenly believe in themselves that they can do something. So it's definitely encouraging to hear that somebody like you doesn't need much to get yourself going, even when you could doubt yourself in the beginning. So
Absolutely.
I definitely think that's very important to keep in mind. All right. How about we go into a little more bit of the present aspect
Mhm.
of sports? So obviously, it seems like you were very involved with sports as a kid. How did you get involved with it as an adult, and how are you still involved in it? And what aspect of that still appeals to you, basically? Like,
Sure. I will tell you that the way I got involved in coaching youth sports was because of one of my nephews. He was um, I have a couple of brothers, and his dad, my brother, is not very sports minded, and my favorite childhood memories were playing baseball. And I looked at my nephew, and I'm like, I want him to have that experience. And I was at a time where I was, I guess I was kind of feeling like I wasn't going to ever have kids of my own for whatever reason. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to coach my nephew. And so I ended up coaching his youth baseball team. And that's really the way I got started, was because I love baseball. I wanted to spend more time with my nephew. I wasn't sure I was ever going to have kids of my own. And I just thought, you know what, I think we can do this. And it was from the moment we started, something clicked. It was just this way of connecting with people. I could see what sports could do for little kids and building up their confidence. And the reality is, I think I'm very realistic. In kind of like you, Keegan. I read a whole lot and I look at all sorts of statistics and stuff like that. And the bottom line is that if you look at the number of people who actually make it to the major leagues and play professional baseball, it's very, very small, right? So
right,
all of these kids, it's like, what can baseball do for people? And I am a big believer, like I said, that the life lessons you can learn transcend the game itself, and it really does. And all those rules of baseball, the be safe, the have fun, those apply to everything you do, not just to sports. But it's important that when you go out and you find a job, it's something you're passionate about. Have fun at what you're doing, be super passionate, be safe. It's especially, look, during a pandemic like we're in right now,
right,
being safe, how important is that? And if you
right,
don't have your health, being safe is also about being healthy and making good decisions for yourself, so all of those rules, play hard, whatever you do, it's like, make sure you're doing it, to the best of your ability.
Right.
um, Thinking first, how important is that before, you go out and do anything in the world. And so these were just kind of core values that I had. And I thought that this was a really great opportunity for me to try to help kids out. And then here's the secret, Keegan, that no one really tells you.
Hmm.
When you coach, no matter how much time and effort you put in, you get so much more back from the kids.
Right.
You almost feel guilty, because it is such a great experience. And I feel like I've learned more from like you guys than
Hmm.
I ever taught you. So
Right.
it's very much a win-win situation.
Right. Well, I would disagree, but I do appreciate your compliment.
Oh,
So
it's true, Keegan. You'll see one day when
I'm sure I will, man. I'm sure I
there
will.
you go.
All right. Well, how about before we shift into the spectrum aspect, we go a little more specific into that question. Tell us more about your time, specifically as a coach in the Santa Monica Little League, and also as the president too, because
Mhm.
I'm sure being the president is something you don't get to do every day, and I think a lot of people would appreciate it if you explained to us what that was like exactly.
Sure. It's interesting when to me, the whole goal of being president, I had absolutely no desire to be president, but I believe strongly in the ideals of what Little League can do for people. So my major goal was to make sure that kids could just concentrate on baseball. And believe it or not, when someone once told me that if they had their way, they would ban anyone over the age of 18 from coming anywhere near a baseball field. And I think to a certain extent, there's a little bit of truth to that, right? It's that kids just want to have fun. And I think oftentimes parents have different ideas about how that should look. Some parents, all they care about is making their kids the best they can be because they, view them as future Major League Baseball players. Others, just want their kids to have a good time, and they don't care whether they play well or they don't play well. There's a lot of politics that go on behind the scene, and I really just wanted to make sure that we could grow Little League into something that was inclusive for the community, but more importantly than anything was that it was just the greatest experience ever for kids. And that was really my drive throughout, all the years of me being president.
Right.
The my time being president was not always smooth sailing. There was definitely some division among parents about what the league should be about, but I've
Right.
always been very strong on the idea that what we're really trying to do is yes, do we want to make people better baseball players? Absolutely. But what we really want to do is we want to make kids better people. And I used to tell this to coaches all the time. I'm
Right.
like, when you're, 5, 10, 20 years from now, when you run into former players, they're not going to remember whether you won or lost. But
Right.
if you were a jerk, they're going to remember that,
Of course.
and you have an opportunity to really make an impact on people's lives. And it's a special relationship. And
Yeah.
it's interesting when you get a group of people together. You're going to have, if you have 12 kids on a team, you're going to have 12 different needs, 12 different personalities, 12
Right.
different everything. And as a coach, you get the opportunity to make a difference in each and every one of their lives. So it's to me, I wanted to make sure that the league as a whole was had that healthy look towards sports, to make sure that they knew that we're trying to build good community. And I'm really proud to say I think we were very successful in it. And the people who took the presidency after me, they've done even better things, and Little League is growing, and I think that's wonderful.
I certainly think so too, and I definitely think your success has been felt in a lot of ways, not just by me, but by a lot of people. So I think you should give yourself a good pat on the back right there for everything you've done. But anyway, how about we I think we should move into connecting the sports with the spectrum aspect of the show. So about how, you know, kids with, mental or emotional health challenges use sports to cope with what they were dealing with, and how you help them to deal with that, and yourself too, if that is fit. But I think before we do that, we should give a shout out to our one of our sponsors.
Do you own a classic Mustang, Corvette, Camaro, or Chevelle from the 1960s or 70s? Does the clock in your dash keep accurate time? Do you want to get a new clock for your car, but you don't want to pay $200, $300, or even $500 for a new clock? Well, then go to impactautopartsstore.com for a brand new quartz clock that looks identical to the original and is powered by a single AA battery, all at prices less than half that of a restored clock or a reproduction. Go to the website, impactautopartsstore.com, and keep on cruising.
And with that, I would like to first, actually, before I ask any questions, I would actually like to show another visual that I think will help our audience, for those at least who are watching visually, understand just how impactful or like true it is that you both had an impact on my life, but also that I had to deal with certain things that made me stand out more than some of the other kids on the team. So I have a picture right here, and for those of you who aren't watching, of me on your team, David, and you're right here in the middle of all these kids, talking to them, and literally that number 7 kid right there, that's me just staring off into the abyss, daydreaming, because that's what I like to do. And I think that's just a great example of how true it is that even with everything you did to help me out, it was still clear that, there were certain aspects of me that, stood out because I was autistic.
Keegan, if I can share one of my favorite moments of coaching you.
Sure.
So there was a game where you were out in left field, and
Okay.
And all of a sudden I'm looking, and I'm sort of scanning the whole field, watching all the players, and all of a sudden you just turned your back to home plate and you were looking out over the left field fence. And so immediately I called time, and and the umpire said, okay. So I ran out to left field, and I came out, and I said, Keegan, what's going on? And you just looked at me and you said, Coach, I just need a minute. I'm like, okay,
Yep.
and I said, I'm totally good with that. I said, but here's the deal, I'm going to start using my hands, and we're going to pretend like I'm talking about all sorts of strategy and stuff like that. But in the meantime, you just take your time,
Right.
and get it all together. I said, but at some point, we're going to need to turn around because of rule number 2. We want to be safe, right? And we got to be looking at the field. And if you need to take a couple more minutes and want to do that in the dugout, that's totally fine. But for the time being, we'll just wait until the umpire comes out.
Right.
And so we did this, and then after a couple minutes, you collected yourself, and you turned around and you just looked at me and said, Coach, I'm okay. And I said, terrific. And we went back.
Yep.
And I just thought, what the most wonderful part about that, Keegan, was that you just knew what you needed.
Right.
And to me, that was really the key. It's like, and I think that it's just knowing what your players need. And so much of the time, if you just ask your player what they need, you'll find out. And but I just had so much respect for you, Keegan, at that point, because like I said, with whatever it was, it's like you knew what you needed at that moment.
Right.
We could give it to you.
Right.
And then the game went on. And that was great.
Right. No, I will always accept honesty from somebody. It's like I'm never afraid to hear the truth. I'm never afraid to abide to their request, as long as as long as they're willing to abide to mine at the same time. And so I think we both were good with how we dealt with that, and I think a lot of people could learn from that at the same time. But anyway, how about we focus a little more on getting into talking about what being on the spectrum can do to somebody, and how basically somebody like you can help them out, or how you can even help yourself too at the same time. So I'd like to say, I'd first like to start by focusing on you specifically one more time, and that is, beyond just physical health, how have sports helped you in your life? And I know you kind of answered this question already, but it's like, is there anything more, I guess, you'd like to add to that aspect?
Yeah. You know, and I guess the only thing I would add to that is that sports, and again, I'm going to choose my words carefully here,
Right.
but there is sports sometimes can really take on more than just the game,
Hmm.
and I think that again, those life lessons that you can impart and you can take from sports is just
Right.
really really important. Sports always gave me confidence. It gave me the hard life lessons that
Right.
if you want to be good at something, you got to work at it,
Right.
and if you want to get ahead, you've got to be able to work with people. And it really, sports has always been, I think, a metaphor for life. And
Hmm.
now even in my professional life, I still the life lessons I learned on the baseball field, I use those every day, every
Right.
single day.
Right.
So sports is great. And even now during a pandemic when everybody is stuck inside and all that, I got to tell you, as I'm sure same with you,
Right.
watching this baseball season, I mean, it was just tremendous. It was
Right.
just great to see, that there is a familiarity and watching the nuances of everything that goes on in sports,
Yeah.
and especially with baseball.
Yeah.
For me, that the rule of think first,
Right.
it's so much of baseball is about thinking about what's going to happen before it happens.
Hmm.
And that's pretty much, the way I deal with my life, is that I'm always trying to think, okay, what are the consequences of things that I do? What are the consequences of what other people might do?
Yeah.
And I think that just the process of being able to think ahead of time and being just a good person, I think sports just makes people better human beings. So,
Absolutely. It certainly has done that for me. And, especially during this time, it's like we really have started to really appreciate just how important they are in our lives now that they've been taken away, at least for a period. But, I think that's definitely both very true and just, I think, very like, helpful in how it just reminds us all about how, hey, this isn't like something that we just treat as something to do for a couple hours. Like, this is serious. It's like this is something that can both help us and has helped us. And it's like we should not treat it as if it doesn't matter, because it does. And I think for the most part we have, but I think it's a good reminder at the same time, especially during this time, of what it truly does mean for us.
and I have to tell you, Keegan, when I look at people like you,
Hmm.
and not only in baseball, but playing basketball and just seeing your evolution from, the kid who, just standing off to the side or doing whatever, seeing your confidence grow and grow,
Right.
until, in basketball, it's like, holy crud, it's like and obviously my heart is in baseball, but
Right.
just seeing your love of basketball,
Right.
like you can't help but walk away from watching a game that you're playing not feeling great, just
Right.
seeing you, like the pure joy of making a three-pointer,
Hmm. Yeah.
and it's just, it
Right.
brings out, I mean, I always say that sports is like throwing Miracle Grow on people's characters traits. It brings out the best of them and it brings out the worst. But with
Yeah.
you, it just brings out the absolute best. And
Right.
and it's just always really, it's fun to watch sports
Yeah.
in that way. And I
Well,
think sports can do a lot.
yeah. Well, I won't lie and say it always brings out the best, but usually it
No,
does. So
yep.
at the same time, I definitely can understand why you would think that, and I do truly appreciate it at the same time.
Mhm.
Okay, so now I think we should actually talk about some of those serious questions that usually everyone's asking related to this, but can usually never answer. Though I'm hoping maybe you can to a degree.
You
So
bet.
let's start with this. When you hear, so one of the most common phrases associated with having challenges related to what I've been talking about for so long is mental health. And basically, my question is very simple, but at the same time, it's very complicated. And it's that when you hear that term, the term mental health, what pops into your head? What does it mean to you? And does it vary too? Like, what do you think? you associate with that, and just like, how do you think maybe others should feel about that?
So I'm not sure if my thought process on this is mainstream or not, but I'll tell you, this is always the way that I've dealt
Listen,
with
man, it doesn't have to be mainstream.
it.
This is about you, not everybody else.
There you go. So when I hear about mental health issues, I don't put a whole lot of stock into that, because I think everyone's got issues.
Right.
I don't care who you are, everyone's got their stuff that they're working through.
Right.
And to me, I'm a little bit hesitant about labels, because I think labels tend to kind of put us into boxes and stuff like that. But I think
Right.
we all have different needs, and I think that you can learn from everybody. And I think that what is really important is, especially for coaching, and whether someone's on the spectrum or not. I've always told, especially as president, when I'm, trying to help other coaches become better coaches,
Right.
you've got to be a good listener, and you've got to be able to ask good questions. And to me, the question is always, what do you need? What can I do to help you be better?
Right.
And I think that is always the first place to go. And so when I hear about terms about like mental health and all that kind of stuff, I just don't put a lot of it's not the kind of thing um, that I shy away from,
Right.
or that I embrace. It just, to me, that just says, hey, this is an area where I'm going to go and need to dig a
Right.
little bit deeper to figure out what are the needs of that athlete, what are the needs of that person,
Right.
and so I go from there.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, if I have 12 kids on a team, I'm looking at each of those 12 and saying, okay, what is it that motivates them? What is it,
Right.
what's standing in their way of being the best that they can be?
Yeah.
What can I do to bring out the very best? And
Right.
everyone's going to have different stuff,
Yeah.
but bottom line, we all have our issues.
Right.
So
Yeah.
some are just more difficult than others to overcome, but that's just a challenge. And I'm always up for a good challenge.
Right. Listen, man, you're right in saying sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all. It's like, at the end of the day, you're right. Everybody does have challenges, and while they may not be the same, they're still challenges, and they're still hard to overcome. And at the same time, everybody needs to deal with them. And so it shouldn't matter, what kind of challenge it is. And I think that's definitely a great way to approach a person, and just, you know, not look at them for their challenges, but rather for, how they can overcome them. You
Yeah,
shouldn't.
and really just, like I said, we all have different abilities, but we all have the same ability to do our best. And
Right.
as a coach, my job is to make sure that, number one, I can make you a better person, and number two, what do we have to do to make you be the best person you can be,
Absolutely.
and yeah.
No, I
So,
definitely think that's helpful. And it kind of leads into my next question a
mhm.
little bit, I guess, which is that, as a coach and as president, you've interacted obviously with a lot of people, young and old, as athletes, or who are athletes and who are parents and all that kind of stuff. Bottom line is this: you've interacted with a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds, and that's important. But focusing specifically on those who are on the spectrum, how often did you come across those kinds of people where you believed that they had a type of condition, whatever it was, whether it was autism, ADHD, bipolarity, whatever, you know, were there ever moments where you believe that? How often did that happen? And basically, uh, did any stick out specifically, and, you know, maybe had a bigger impact on you than others? And just why, too? It's like the why in all this.
Yeah, so the short answer is it's a lot more prevalent than I think people would realize. I think that there's a lot of people who go both diagnosed and undiagnosed,
Right.
and the reality is in Little League especially, they've depending on where you fall in the spectrum, and they have different options. There's a challenger division where it's for people with severe limitations, and it really takes competition completely out of the fold, and it's much more in a Special Olympics type of
Right.
model. And that's great for some people, but for the ones that are on the spectrum that are more high functioning, you know, we would see a fair number. And I think it was always easier when the family was open to discussing what was going on. And if
Right.
they accept the player for who they are and not
Mhm.
for who they want them to be, it makes it much easier. Now, Keegan, you, if you don't mind me speaking about you, you were exceedingly lucky because you have two parents who are incredibly supportive and
Right.
very communicative. And I think that's really, you know, if any family with an athlete on the spectrum, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be open and communicative with
Right.
the adult who is overseeing your child in any sporting event.
Yep.
And being honest about, you know, what are the limitations, but what are the possibilities, and
Right.
what are the things that work to motivate, you know, that child. And to me, that's important. And we've had some incredible successes. I will tell you, besides you, Keegan, who is just
Right.
a coach's dream, I will tell you that.
Right.
I remember one year I coached a team with someone who had some special needs, and you know, I think as parents, people really worry about, like, how are the other kids going to treat them. And this player had on the ability standpoint to play at a high level,
Right.
didn't have it.
Right.
On an attitude basis, had it in spades. Like,
Right.
this kid just loved baseball, like
Right.
loved baseball. And as a result, all of his teammates were like the biggest fans of him, because you could see the genuineness of the joy when he played. And in fact, so again, with rule number 2 being safe, you know, I
Right.
always wanted to make sure that people had a chance. I was never just going to stick someone in the outfield. I always wanted to play the infield.
Right.
And I wanted them to experience the whole game. But but we got to be safe. So I would always work extra hard with them to get them to a point where, you know, their safety wasn't in danger by playing there.
Right.
And I got to tell you, this whole team just rallied around this kid, trying to help him take extra ground balls, doing what he could to get him into the infield. And it was inspirational. And then we had, you know, another player on that team who, you know, I guess from a, you know, I mean, again, with avoiding the labels, but probably not on the spectrum, had all of the ability in the world, but just had the worst attitude ever. And boy, his teammates would just turn their back on him because he didn't try. He had all this ability and he didn't care. And so as a result, it was not a good experience for him. It was not a good experience for the team. But, you know, that kid who was definitely on the spectrum, who had this great attitude, he was the glue that held that whole team together. And it was a great experience.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that is a common theme for people on the spectrum to find other ways. And I think that's kind of one of the benefits to being on the spectrum, which is they don't necessarily find ways to help the team like when they're actually playing, but it's like they find every other way to help them out at the same time, you know. They always look to find a different way that, you know, nobody would usually care about to help the team out. And that's honestly when the team usually realizes just how important it really is. So
and I will tell you, every so often, one of those kids is going to make that play. And when he does, it's like, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
You know, so it's to me, everyone helps a team in different way. We all, like I said, we all have different abilities, but we all bring that same ability to do something really great. And sometimes it's, you know, by making a play, and sometimes it's by, you know, being a good teammate. You know, and again, I will tell you that that year he was the glue that kept us all together and really made a very successful season.
Yeah, no. Well, I guess kind of building off of that, first, actually, I'm going to start with a little story that I remember that kind of relates to that. And second of
Mhm.
all, I'm going to ask a quick follow-up question. So first of all, I remember, in addition to everything you've mentioned that I used to do that made me stick out for my autism, one of the other things that I used to do that wasn't necessarily sanitary was I used to pick my nose a lot.
Mhm.
I don't know why. I don't know, how it benefited me. I just did it. And that's partially because of my autism, I feel. But I remember, you were very lenient on it. You usually let it pass by. However, though, I remember there was one time during one of our championship games, we were playing on TV or were about to play on TV. And I remember in our final meeting before we went out there, you brought us all together and you called me out. But first, you told a very elaborate story about how there was some like manager or whatever in the major leagues who had picked his nose and gotten caught right in it. And I remember you just came right over to me and you're like, Keegan, don't be that guy. You can do it
Right.
whenever else, just not right now when everybody's watching.
Yeah. And mostly there, that's me trying to protect you, right?
Right.
And
No.
so
And the fact of the matter is you did it very well too by giving a real example of, how it applied and why I shouldn't do it. So it's like, again, that's a nod to how you coached right there. But I guess what I'd like to ask as a result of that, as a quick follow up, is were there, first of all, I'm assuming there were moments where you didn't know that somebody or didn't have a confirmation that somebody was on the spectrum, but you saw behavior maybe that made you suspect that. And
Mhm.
basically, what was how did you think, like, how did you think to deal with that kind of person? Like, not necessarily with how you coached them, but like, did you try at all to bring it up to them or maybe just like give them a sense of what they might be experiencing? Did you ever think to like sort of create an intervention? I don't
So
think that's accurate, but it's the best word I got.
yeah, and I think the short answer is yes, and the longer answer to that is it's a difficult subject to
Right.
address with, especially with parents.
Oh, of
Parents.
course.
And but for me it was always you try to handle it as sensitively as you can, but what first and foremost, I'm always looking out for the well-being of the kids.
Hmm.
And if I see something that I think would be beneficial, sadly I'm not going to hold back,
Right.
because I want what's best for the kids. So typically the way it would happen, and this did happen on a couple of different occasions, you
Right.
know you again, if you don't have parents who are communicating to you about what they're seeing,
Right.
being in practice, being at games, you see different behavior. And when I start seeing behavior that I think really needs to be addressed, something that is a little bit out of the norm, a little bit, just something that is unique
Right.
or just kind of out of the ordinary. First thing I would do is I'd always talk with the kid and I'd
Right.
find out, say, hey, you know what, tell me what's going on. Tell me about, what you're feeling. Tell me about how, you're perceiving things,
Yeah.
and tell me what's going on. And, I think it's hard because you're dealing with adults, and
Right.
oftentimes, especially in competitive situations, adults sometimes forget about the idea that this is all about the kids, because they
Right.
get so caught up into,
Yeah.
you know we got to win because now, my worth as a man is dependent on us winning a championship, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
that kind of becomes that mentality. And I think parents sometimes they don't necessarily want to see it with kids. And so typically what I would do is I would always do this either after a practice or after a game, or even call them up,
Right.
but away from everyone else. And I would just sit there and say, hey, you know what, this is what I'm observing. I mean, with your parents were so great because they had a good sense of who you were. But
Right.
with other people, I would pull them aside and say, hey, let me tell you what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a kid who is not interacting with their teammates. He's a good kid. He's, he's nice. He's doing all this kind of stuff, but he's just kind of, he's not integrating the way that other people are. Have you noticed this at school? Is there anything that I could be doing that would help, make this child more comfortable in this environment? What have you seen? And then if people, depending on their responses, there are times when I would say, hey, you know what? There are counselors at school that might be able to, to lend some assistance here, or there might be some professionals that can help give them the tools they need to succeed. And not just at baseball, but, just with schoolwork, with, making friends, with doing whatever. And I think, again, it's like every kid has an issue, and that's just the nature of being a child. But it's the ones when you start suspecting that, hey, you know what, maybe this is something a little bit more than what you would see in others, just knowing that there are resources there. And the same thing would be, as kids got older, there were some that you kind of suspected were, using, illegal substances or something like that. And again, that's a conversation that, you kind of have to have with a parent, and just saying, look, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing someone who's not engaging, and their eyes are all glassed over or whatever. I just want to, make you aware of it, not in an, accusatory manner, but it just good communication, I think, just benefits everybody.
Right. No, I definitely think that, matters a lot. And, I'm sure a lot of people like myself can understand why that matters. And at the same time, we can also keep, kind of playing to ourselves how much we usually want to avoid that stuff. But I guess at the same time, the fact of the matter is we know that people like you are trying to help us, and that, at the same time, we do have a responsibility to recognize, our own needs, and just kind of, work best with everybody else to not hide them, but just minimize the impact it has on them. And even then, sometimes at least make clear to them what we need, and, just make it so that they can help us in the best way possible, so
Absolutely.
that we, both them and us, can benefit. And I guess,
Are you looking to boost your SAT score by at least 360 points? Whether your goal is the SAT, ACT, AP classes, or general test preparation, turn to Sam's Tutoring Company. Sam is a Caltech educated tutor with over 17 years of experience teaching over 700 students of all ages. Whether you want to learn in person or remotely, Sam is ready to help you accomplish your academic goals. Call Sam's Tutoring Company. If you mention the promo code Sports Spectrum, you'll receive 25% off the price of your first session.
and I guess, I'd like to go a little more into the specifics of what that process required of you. And basically what I'm asking here is, in your interactions with these type of athletes, whether you knew they were diagnosed with something or not, it's did you ever make specific adjustments, in how you coached them or how you treated them, and, just how you interacted with them too? It's what did you think you needed to do as a coach to make them feel better and make them more successful?
Sure. I mean, again, all of this has the root in good communication. So once I would find out that a player had some special needs, that they had issues with either attention or with, whatever it is, you try to figure out, okay, within the parameters of the game, what can we do to make this experience the best one possible? And oftentimes it would involve, and again, if you don't mind me using you as an example, oftentimes before a game, I would go up to the umpire and the opposing coach ahead of time, and I would tell them, it's hey, I've got Keegan on my team. Keegan is a great kid, a great kid. You want 12 Keegans on your team, and if I could clone them, I would. Okay.
Yeah.
However, Keegan has some needs, and there may be some times when Keegan might turn his back to home plate, and know that this isn't because he's being disrespectful. This isn't, and I would just kind of educate both the umpire and the opposing coach to say, look, these are some needs, and we won't let it disrupt the game, but you need to be aware of this because, oftentimes people jump to conclusions, and they see
Right.
someone turn their back and they think, oh, he just doesn't care about the game, or he's being disrespectful,
Right.
or doing whatever. And the reality is you just needed a minute,
Right.
you know, and I think that when you explain that to other people, it just makes the experience all that much better. Oftentimes kids, especially with like ADHD, who've got attention span,
Right.
issues, very difficult for them to stay in the batter's box, and they always want to, move. They're fidgeting, they're doing whatever. And
Right.
there are some rules that Little League has put, in place to speed up the game, and they don't want people going in and out of the batter's box.
Right.
And I would have to explain to umpires, it's like, I know what the rule is there for, and I get the idea. However, that rule doesn't fit this kid.
Right.
And we need to make accommodations for people like that to give them the same quality experience that everyone else gives.
Right.
And again, it's just understanding what those needs are and then educating people about what those needs are. And I
Right.
would always ask opposing coaches, I'm like, hey, are you okay with that? And then, to a certain extent, you have to educate the team as well. But educating the team is a little bit more difficult because you don't want to say, hey, we're going to treat someone differently.
Right.
Although I used to always tell all my teams, like, yeah, I'm treating people differently. I treat everyone differently, based on, your needs are not going to be your needs,
Right.
but ultimately, I think when you build up teamwork, then everyone is pulling for the person who is overcoming challenges, and I had no hesitation about, putting you in the infield, even in situations where you want the person who's going to be able to, make that play. It's like, I'm always of the opinion, Keegan can make that play.
Right.
Maybe he'll make it 5 times out of 10 instead of 9 times out of 10, but he can make that play. And I'm not going to put winning ahead of the idea that we're trying to build something bigger than the game itself. And that
Right.
is, having people not only do their pass, but it's also about teaching the kids who don't have those needs about how to deal with society,
Right.
and like I said, everyone's got their issues.
Right. No, and I definitely think, obviously we all know that we live in a stereotypical world, so I think it's very helpful that those who do know about what certain people need, that they're willing to educate others about that and make sure they understand the full picture, so that way those people are better off, both those who judge and those who act out, basically. And just like, people know, then it's like why somebody's doing it and why they also shouldn't feel upset or whatever about it. So I definitely think people like you are very helpful with how they are willing to share that with others, and just you know keep everybody in the right place at the right time.
So Keegan, let me turn the tables on you a little bit. From your perspective, when you were on that team, how did you feel? Did you feel like you were being singled out? Did you feel like a part of the team? What was the vibe for you?
I mean, I guess I'm a very respectful person, so I don't think I ever felt like I was being singled out inappropriately. At least, I always felt there was a good reason for me to be singled out if it ever did come. But I mean, at the same time, it's like I always felt like I was, trying, trying to fit well with my teammates, and also just trying to make sure they didn't make the wrong assumptions. Like I was basically trying as hard as you were not to let them think the wrong idea of me. And while maybe you were better at that than me, just because you weren't that person, and it's a lot easier to believe somebody else. At the same time, I think, the fact of the matter is I worked at trying to gain the trust of my teammates, mostly by means of just, like earning their respect for my play, earning their respect for how I respected them, things like that. And I think it's just like I just kind of grew so used to that at the same time, I kind of became used to spreading it to other people, and also just being used to them maybe making their general assumptions and then kind of just responding to them as well. So, it's like at the end of the day, this is something I've had to endure my entire life with, at the same time, being on a playing field made no difference to me, and it only made me want to be better at it too. At the same time, like because this was something that meant more to me than a normal situation. So I wanted to make sure that I had the full assets that at my disposal that would allow me to gain what I wanted to, while at the same time not holding other people back. Because I don't want
So
that for anybody.
sure. And I always think when sports is at its best, it kind of leads the way for society. Like with Jackie Robinson and integrating baseball, that really led the way into the civil rights movement. And I think that that sports has a unique way of doing that. Do you feel like for you that sports helped you, integrate, your autism in a way that could be productive? Like what was,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. I felt like sports allowed me to do things that normally I wouldn't be able to do. And even if not all of them would have happened with or without autism, at the same time, the fact of the matter is that I didn't care about that, simply because I was in a place where it's like I knew that I could be me, but I knew at the same time that others could be themselves. So it's like at the same time I felt that I was in a place where it was okay to not care about, what those kinds of people, who would criticize me or who would put me down would think, because at the same time I was like, it doesn't matter in a place like this. It's like I'm having too much fun. So it's like if it helps you, that's fine with me, because at the end of the day, I could care less about that kind of thing. So
that's awesome.
yeah, and I guess that kind of also leads into my next question once again, which is that specifically, how do sports help somebody like you better understand and or address the challenges, with any issues that either you or one of your players might have, or somebody just in general.
So, sports,
And this
again, oh,
and
go ahead.
this yeah, and this is also just like in not just like how does sports help you, with sports, but just in life in general too.
Yeah, again, I think because there's so many life lessons in sports that you can apply to everyday life. Sports to me is, um, it's a place where you can learn lessons very safely. I always said that I would much rather a kid learn how to respect authority by, learning not to argue with an umpire who's holding a mask and a baseball, rather than a police officer who's holding a gun and a baton.
Hmm.
These are good places to learn life lessons in a very, very safe way.
Right.
And you can learn a lot of these lessons, um, where if you make a mistake, you lose a game.
Yep.
The consequences are not real great, but it's a wonderful crucible in which you can learn life lessons.
Hmm.
And to me, being in that environment has always helped me be a better person. I think it's helped me be, a better manager,
Hmm.
a better father, a better
Right.
spouse. I think, just a better member of community, because it's, the bottom line is that any team, whether it's baseball or any other thing, it is a community, and you have to get along, and you have to do your part, and you have to make sure that everyone is pulling in the same direction. And and not to get too philosophical here, but it would be great if, on a national level,
Right.
obviously there's a huge divide right now in our nation, and it would be great to get everyone pulling in the same direction, regardless of political beliefs or anything like that. And
Right.
you can see in sports what happens when you have teams that are divided. You've got those teams just never do well. There's something I believe strongly in chemistry. in chemistry, and not just in terms of everyone being the same, but just everyone respecting one another,
Right.
and everyone acknowledging that we're different, and we come from different perspectives, and we have different outlooks on life, and we have different abilities to do things, and we're all different, but we all need to pull for that same common good. And that's what sports provides us, with this ability to learn that, hey, if we're all striving for the same thing, and we all recognize that we're going to bring something different to the table, let's all pull in that same direction. And that's when I think that things just start flowing.
Right.
And that's the beauty of sports, because when you see it almost look effortless, that's when you've hit that sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we could learn a lot from sports.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. And I guess that kind of also, what you said right there, answers part of the question you asked me earlier, which is that, sports is just like, it allows me to learn in a safe environment. It's like, it literally is just a practice, like, it's a practice field for how I'm gonna, play on the field of life. It's like, it allows me to make the mistakes. It allows me to learn the lessons that, once I step up to the plate in life, it's like, I'll be ready to hit the long ball in. It's like, I won't be afraid to take a swing, and if I miss, I'll know what to do next, and how to react to that and all. And I think that kind of was why sports was and is so very helpful to me. It's like, it allows me to not have to worry about, what's going to happen if, I fail or succeed, because at the same time, that's not the point of sports. The point of sports is to learn from those things. It's not to obtain them.
Keegan, once again, you have proven that you're wise beyond your years. That is,
Yes.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. No. Yeah, no, I definitely get that compliment a lot, but it still means a lot hearing it from somebody like you.
Mm.
And actually that helps me go into the final question, which is, you know, we talk about being wise beyond your years, and we both are, I feel. But, obviously there are a lot of people in this world who aren't wise beyond their years, or don't appear to be, at least. And part of the reason for that is because they either don't know something, or they aren't willing to listen to something. And we obviously, a lot of progress has been made on learning more about these issues as time goes by and stuff, and how to respond and deal with them. But at the same time, obviously, there's a stigma that still exists and is very prominent at the same time, though it is decreasing, thankfully, of people who, either don't accept this, or don't know about, these kinds of issues and how to deal with them and all that stuff. And as a result, it's like, when you interact with these people, it's like you feel, disrespected or whatever. You feel like they don't know anything. And, at the same time, while you have a reason to believe that, I feel it's beneficial if at the same time, like you've done so many times before, you try to educate them at the same time, so that in the future they may not have the same response or the same reaction. And as a result, they make everybody feel better, both themselves and, others. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask here is, you know, we've talked a lot in this previous hour. We've discussed a lot of topics, but if there's one specific thing out of everything we've gone through that you want somebody who's listening or watching this right now to know, like, related to playing sports while you're on the spectrum, or coaching somebody who's playing sports on the spectrum, what do you want them to know, both about your experiences and what they should take away from that and put into their future experiences, so that they can understand, what being on the spectrum is like, and how to appreciate it more, maybe, too?
I would say to those people that there's nothing more rewarding than taking a player, taking a child, and being able to see them achieve the very most that they can achieve, and to see them flourish. And Keegan, I got to tell you, it may not seem that way, but I was 100% on the money when I said that as a coach, you get out of it more than you put in. And I know I put a lot into it, but I feel like I got so much out of coaching, and none more than I think working with people on the spectrum. And only because whether right or wrong, it's just sometimes the path forward for people on the spectrum is going to be a little bit more rocky, and it's going to be a little bit more challenging. But the reality is that, people on the spectrum have so much to offer the world, so much. And I think if you undervalue that, the contribution that they make, then you are not doing yourself a service. Forget about the person on the spectrum, but you have to recognize that everyone has something to offer, and some, it's almost undescribable how much they have to offer the world. And so to me, it's like one of those assets that oftentimes people, again, they just don't value it the way that they should. And so from my perspective, I've always gone out of my way to sit there and say, you know what, I think that not only can I work with someone, I think that we can make the situation, good, not just for the player, but for the entire team and for the entire community. There's a joy that comes from that, from seeing people joyous. And I will tell you, Keegan, I think if I had my way, I would make every professional athlete in the world have to volunteer at Special Olympics. Because when you see an athlete at Special Olympics, the joy of just competing, you get the idea of like the special place that sports holds, and how it can bring out the very best in people. And like you pointed out, sometimes the very worst. But I wish that I could impart that joy of competing in every baseball player who's making $10 million or more a year. You can see the players, today you can see the players who play with joy in their heart. You can, and just to take the 2020 Dodgers, you look at Mookie Betts, and that guy just plays with heart. He plays with joy. And the reality is that sports frees a lot of people to be who they want to be. And I think a lot of times with people on the spectrum, sports provides that ability to feel like they can be who they want to be. And then hopefully they carry that beyond, the field or the court, and they really become the person that they're destined to become. And so I would encourage everyone out there who is a coach or wants to coach, or has a kid, it's the time spent is so worth it. And Keegan, no more than I gotta tell you, my heart is so filled right now with love and admiration and respect for what you're doing and who you've become. The fact that you still have that game ball, it's like, it touches my heart in so many ways. And I look at you and I would never be so bold to claim any of your success, but it makes me feel so good to see you developing into this man who is, just this bright ray of sunshine, and having played even the smallest little part in helping you down that path, that makes it all worthwhile. And I just I can't express to you enough like the complete joy that brings me. So yeah.
Well, going back to that game ball for just a second, in addition to writing the 6 rules of baseball, you also wrote something else specifically to me, and I'd just like to read it because I think our audience will appreciate it. You wrote that I was the most determined player on the team, and that you are such a joy to coach, a great player, and an even better person. Thank you. And I think that's very, that kind of nails on everything we've talked about. It's like people like me, it's like, we may not be the most skilled, or the best players on the team, but we always have a sense of determination to prove ourselves as a result, And I think that's just incredibly important for, everybody to recognize, and just, keep in mind too. It's like, there are a lot of things to remember, but, there are some things that you just simply never forget at the same time.
And Keegan, those words, as true as they were back then, they're every bit as true right now.
Right.
And
Yeah.
If it weren't for the pandemic and being on Zoom, I would reach through this computer and I'd give you a big hug right now.
As would I, man. As would I. Well, listen, man. Uh, I think I first of all I want to thank you so much for being on the show. It was truly great to have you on. You were an amazing guest, and I'm sure you gave a lot of insight into our audience as to, what um, coaching sports can bring, both for those who are on the spectrum and even those who aren't. And just basically like how to, adapt and how to enjoy it at the same time. Like, I mean, again, going back to these 6 rules of baseball, I'll recap them just for the sake of our audience. We have rule number 1, have fun. That is so, so important. And then you have rule number 2, be safe. Also very important. You always got to make sure you're keeping your everybody as healthy and as safe as they can be, especially today too. And then rule number 3, play hard. You always got to make sure you put your best foot forward. You can't allow the little things to stop you from doing your best. And then rule number 4, think first. Always make sure you have some idea of what you're doing, and also just be sure that you can have an idea of why you're doing this and all, and just make sure you know what this is all about. And then rule number 5, teamwork. Make sure you always respect your teammates, and also make sure you remember that they do matter too. They are not just there for you. They are there for themselves, and it's important that you work with them so you can all feel that way. And then nothing better than rule number 6, which is have fun. Once again, it is so, so important. And honestly, if there's anything that anybody could learn about coaching or playing as somebody or with somebody who's on the spectrum, the one thing you should know is you're always going to have fun no matter who they are. It's like they will always have fun no matter what keeps them at bay.
So Keegan, a small secret of my coaching technique was I always felt like I was implanting these little time bombs of knowledge into every player that I coached. And my hope was that some of them would go off, later in life, that they could draw on that. And I got to tell you, my heart is so filled right now with such joy hearing you say those words and that you still remember them. To me, you couldn't give me a better gift. So
Right.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I wish you nothing but success with this format. I think that this society needs more things like this. So I applaud you 100% for coming up with a podcast. And the reality is nowhere to go but uphill from here after me. So
Absolutely, man. Well, listen, I know you're the first guest ever on this podcast, but one thing's for sure, you will not be the last. And one thing's for sure, too, which is that you will never be forgotten, I feel.
good
You will
deal.
always be etched in the history books as the first ever guest on the podcast Sports on the Spectrum.
Perfect.
I feel
love
that
it.
I feel that's hopefully becomes a better honor as time goes by, but I have a feeling you appreciate that just enough right now.
You know what, Keegan, regardless of what happens, I will always feel incredibly honored to be your first guest. And just the thought that you thought of me to bring onto this
Right.
again, just from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much.